I never thought I would become this kind of woman. The kind who lies with ease, who orchestrates deceptions with precision, and who betrays the one person who trusted her without question. But life isn't black and white, and the heart doesn't always follow the rules of loyalty. As I zipped up my suitcase, my hands trembled, not with fear, but with excitement. The anticipation was intoxicating. In a few hours, I would be on a plane, heading toward a weekend I had meticulously crafted. The hotel was booked, the itinerary planned, and my alibi set in place. Everything had to go perfectly. And it did. Or so I thought. Are you sure you have everything, babe? Ethan asked, standing in the doorway of our bedroom, his brow furrowed slightly. He was always so methodical, so careful. His attention to detail was what had drawn me to him all those years ago, but now, it was an obstacle I needed to maneuver around. I turned, flashing him a reassuring smile. Of course. The kids' bags are packed, the passports are in the folder, and I've double-checked the flights. We're all set. Ethan exhaled, still holding that nagging expression. He had no reason to doubt me, but something about his instincts always unsettled me. Maybe he had noticed the subtle shifts in my behavior. Maybe he could feel the distance that had been growing between us for months. I closed the suitcase and walked over to him, pressing a soft kiss to his lips, lingering just enough to chase away any suspicion. It's going to be a great trip, I murmured. We need this. And just like that, his eyes softened. He nodded, kissing my forehead. Yeah. We do. The family vacation had been Ethan's idea, a much-needed getaway to Paris, a place I had always wanted to visit. The kids were excited, and I played my part well, mirroring their enthusiasm, even as my mind was elsewhere. Ethan had handled most of the logistics of flights, hotel, sightseeing plans, but what he didn't know was that I had made a small adjustment. A simple call to the airline 2 nights ago was all it took. One cancelled ticket. One small change that would alter the course of everything. I had been strategic. Ethan's brother, Adam, had always been close with the kids. When I called him a week ago, feigning distress about Ethan's workload, he had agreed immediately to step in if needed. He had no idea he was just another pawn in my scheme. The morning of the flight, everything proceeded as planned. Ethan, unaware, drove us all to the airport, his excitement genuine. I played my role seamlessly, loving wife, devoted mother, until we reached the check-in counter. That's when the first domino fell. I'm sorry, Mr. Carter, but your ticket was cancelled. Ethan frowned. That's impossible. I booked all 4 tickets myself. The airline representative tapped at her keyboard before shaking her head. It was cancelled 2 days ago, sir. Do you have any confirmation emails? Ethan pulled out his phone, scrolling through his inbox. His face darkened. He found the cancellation email, but it didn't come from the airline. It came from my email account. I pretended to be just as shocked. That's strange. Why would they cancel just your ticket? I could see his brain working, trying to make sense of it. But before he could question it further, I pulled out my phone and sent him the final blow. A text message, one I had carefully crafted in advance. You should be taking care of the kids. Your brother will take your place. It was the perfect cover. Ethan prided himself on being a family man. I knew he would never make a scene in front of the kids. He would never want to disappoint them. His jaw clenched as he read the message. His gaze lifted, locking onto mine. I met it with just the right mix of exasperation and innocence. This must have been a misunderstanding, I said quickly. We'll figure it out when we land, okay? Adam is already prepared to step in. Ethan took a slow, deep breath. The airport was chaotic, people shuffling around us, oblivious to the storm brewing in his eyes. He looked down at the kids, who were too excited to notice any tension. Fine, he said finally. And just like that, the final piece fell into place. The flight to Paris was seamless. Adam played his part well, keeping the kids entertained while I feigned concern over Ethan's absence. I texted him a few times, just enough to maintain the illusion. But the real trip wasn't to Paris. As soon as we landed, I excused myself to go to the restroom. Instead, I slipped away, my heart hammering as I navigated through the airport. I had booked a separate ticket, a private flight that would take me to my actual destination, Milan, where he was waiting. I turned on my second phone, the one Ethan didn't know about, and sent a single message. "I'm on my way." The reply came instantly. "I can't wait to see you, love." A shiver of anticipation coursed through me. For months, I had planned this escape, weaving a web so intricate that even Ethan, so careful, so meticulous, couldn't see through it. I boarded the flight, my pulse racing. The thought of being in his arms again, of finally having a weekend without hiding, was almost too much to bear. As the plane ascended into the clouds, I allowed myself to breathe. I had done it. I had outmaneuvered my husband, set everything up perfectly. Nothing could go wrong now. Or so I thought. The weekend was everything I had dreamed of. Passionate. Thrilling. Free. But when I returned home, something felt off. The moment I stepped through the door, I saw Ethan standing in the living room, waiting. His face was unreadable, his hands tucked into his pockets. Then, I saw it. His phone screen, still illuminated, displaying something that made my blood run cold. Evidence. Of me. Of him. Of everything. Ethan's eyes met mine. And my world shattered. I've always believed that lies are like fragile glass. When crafted carefully, they reflect perfection, shimmering under the right light. But the thing about glass, it only takes the smallest crack to shatter everything. And standing there in our living room, facing Ethan's piercing gaze, I knew that crack had formed. The house was eerily quiet when I stepped inside. The familiar scent of vanilla from the diffuser in the hallway mixed with something colder, something heavy. The kids' backpacks were tossed carelessly by the door, a stark contrast to the way I'd left everything pristine before our trip. Ethan stood near the fireplace, his posture too stiff, too deliberate. He wasn't scrolling on his phone absent-mindedly like he usually did. No. He was waiting. For me. His phone screen glowed faintly in the dim afternoon light, casting shadows on his face that I'd never seen before, hard lines etched deep, not from age, but from something else. Something darker. I forced a smile, the same one that had gotten me out of countless situations before. "Hey, babe," I said lightly, dropping my carry-on by the door. "We're back." No response. My heart began to thud, slow and heavy, like a drumbeat before a battle. The kids burst past me, oblivious to the tension. "Daddy," they shouted, rushing into his arms. Ethan knelt, hugging them tightly, his eyes never leaving mine over their small shoulders. It was a silent message. Something was wrong. After tucking the kids into bed, I found him in the kitchen, standing by the counter. The soft hum of the refrigerator was the only sound filling the space. He didn't look up when I walked in. I cleared my throat, trying to keep my voice steady. "So, how was the weekend?" Ethan's thumb slid across his phone screen, scrolling through something. Then, without a word, he turned the screen toward me. My breath hitched. There it was. A photo. Me. In Milan. Laughing. With him. The man Ethan didn't know existed, or at least, I thought he didn't. The background was unmistakable, the rooftop terrace of the boutique hotel, the skyline of Milan glowing in the sunset. It wasn't just a candid shot, it was intimate, too close to be accidental. My fingers entwined with his. My smile, too real. I felt the blood drain from my face. Ethan's voice was low, almost a whisper, but each word hit like a sledgehammer. "So, Paris was nice?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. How did he know? Ethan set his phone down, crossing his arms. His eyes weren't angry, not yet. That was what terrified me the most. They were calm, cold, like the ocean right before a storm. I canceled your return flight, he said quietly, his gaze never leaving mine. Thought you might enjoy the extra time with your brother. The words dripped with venom. I swallowed hard. Ethan, Don't, he snapped, his voice sharp, slicing through my excuse before it formed. Just don't insult me with another lie. Silence settled between us, thick and suffocating. I could have confessed right there. Told him everything. But the words tangled in my throat. Instead, I defaulted to what I knew best. Control. It's not what you think, I said, my voice trembling despite my efforts. It's complicated. Ethan's laugh was hollow, humorless. Complicated? No. It's actually very simple. He leaned in slightly, his eyes narrowing. You canceled my ticket. You took my kids on a trip just to use them as a cover. He stopped, his jaw clenching so hard I thought it might break. You think I'm stupid? That's when I saw it, not just anger, but something worse. Betrayal. Real, raw betrayal. I tried to salvage it. I told him it was a mistake, a fleeting thing, something that didn't mean anything. But the more I spoke, the more ridiculous my words sounded, even to myself. Because it wasn't fleeting. And it did mean something. Ethan didn't yell. He didn't throw things or demand answers. He just walked away. Left me standing there in the kitchen, surrounded by the wreckage of my own lies. The door to our bedroom clicked shut softly behind him. And that's when I realized, this wasn't over. Not even close. The crack in the glass had spread. And soon, everything would shatter. The house was unbearably quiet after Ethan shut the bedroom door. The silence wasn't peaceful, it was suffocating, pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't shake off. I stood there in the kitchen, staring at the empty hallway, my mind racing, heart pounding like it was trying to escape my chest. I'd been caught. But it wasn't just the affair. It was the lies layered over lies, the cancelled flight, the fake family trip, the betrayal wrapped in a perfect disguise. I thought I'd covered every detail, controlled every variable. But standing here now, I realized how fragile my world really was. One photo. That's all it took to unravel everything. And Ethan didn't even yell. That was the worst part. I eventually forced myself to move, my legs feeling like they didn't belong to me. I climbed the stairs slowly, pausing in front of our bedroom door. My hand hovered over the handle, but I couldn't bring myself to turn it. What would I say? I'm sorry felt meaningless. It was a mistake would be a lie. So, I did what I'd always done when I felt trapped, I retreated. I went to the guest room, closed the door, and collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep didn't come. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's face, the coldness in his eyes, the disappointment etched into his expression. That look haunted me more than any argument could have. When I woke up, it wasn't to the usual sounds of our life together. No coffee brewing, no clattering of dishes, no laughter from the kids. Just silence. I sat up slowly, my body aching from the tension. The guest room felt foreign, sterile, like it didn't belong in the same house where we'd built our life. I finally made my way downstairs. Ethan was already up, dressed, and packing a small bag by the front door. My heart sank. He didn't even look at me. I cleared my throat, my voice shaky. Ethan, can we talk? He zipped the bag slowly, then stood up, finally meeting my eyes. But there was nothing in his gaze, no warmth, no anger. Just emptiness. There's nothing to talk about, he said flatly. Please, I whispered, taking a step closer. I made a mistake. Ethan let out a sharp breath, shaking his head. A mistake is forgetting to lock the door, or burning dinner. What you did was a choice. Repeatedly. The words hit harder than I expected. I swallowed the lump in my throat. What about the kids? Don't you think we owe them? His jaw clenched. Don't you dare use them to justify this. That shut me up. He grabbed his bag, slinging it over his shoulder. As he reached for the door, I panicked. Where are you going? I blurted out. Ethan paused, his hand on the doorknob. Somewhere I don't have to look at you. And then he was gone, the door clicked shut, leaving me standing there, alone. I thought I'd feel relief. For months, I'd been suffocating in this marriage, craving excitement, chasing something Ethan couldn't give me. But now, faced with the emptiness, I realized how wrong I was. I didn't want this. I wanted the thrill, yes, the attention, the passion, but not the consequences. I wanted to have both lives, to live in the safety of Ethan's stability while indulging in my own selfish desires. But real life doesn't work like that. I spent the day in a daze, going through the motions with the kids, pretending everything was fine. But they weren't stupid. They felt the tension, the absence of their father's laughter, the way my smiles didn't quite reach my eyes. That night, after they went to bed, I sat on the floor of our bedroom, staring at the framed photos on the dresser, wedding pictures, family vacations, birthdays. All lies now. It wasn't until the third day that Ethan reached out. Not a call. Not a voice filled with anger or regret. Just a text. I'll be home Friday to talk. Don't pretend this isn't over. My hands trembled as I read it. Over. The word echoed in my mind, louder than any argument we could have had. But I wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. Because as much as I'd broken this marriage, I wasn't prepared for what came next. After Ethan's message, the days stretched longer than I ever thought possible. The house felt too big, too quiet, like it was mocking me with its emptiness. Every room whispered memories I couldn't escape, family dinners, lazy Sundays, stolen kisses in the hallway. They clung to the walls like ghosts, refusing to let me forget. I kept checking my phone, hoping for another message, something to soften the blunt finality of his words. But there was nothing. Just that single text, cold and sharp. I'll be home Friday to talk. Don't pretend this isn't over. I told myself I wasn't going to break. I'd fix this somehow. I always did. I had built my life around controlling narratives, shaping perceptions, Ethan's, the kids, even my own. But this time felt different. This time, the story was slipping through my fingers. I thought about calling him. Drafted messages over and over again. Can we talk before Friday? I miss you. I made a mistake. But I deleted them all. None of it felt right. None of it felt enough. The truth was, I didn't miss Ethan the way I should have. I missed the comfort, the security, the version of myself I got to be when he looked at me like I was his entire world. But that version of me didn't exist anymore. Maybe she never did. I hated the silence more than anything. So, I did what I always did when things felt out of control. I distracted myself. I cleaned the house obsessively, scrubbing floors that didn't need scrubbing, rearranging drawers, folding laundry with military precision. It was pointless, but it kept my hands busy while my mind spiraled. The kids noticed. Of course, they did. Where's Dad? My daughter asked one night, her small voice fragile, like she already knew the answer but needed to hear it anyway. He's just taking some time, I replied, forcing a smile. She nodded, but her eyes lingered on me, searching for the truth I couldn't give her. By Wednesday, the anxiety was unbearable. So, I did the one thing I knew I shouldn't. I messaged him. Not Ethan. Him. I miss you. The reply came almost instantly. I miss you too. When can I see you? It was like a drug, that rush of validation. Someone still wanted me. Someone still craved me. We arranged to meet the next evening. I told myself it was for closure, that I needed clarity before facing Ethan on Friday. But that was a lie, just like all the others I'd told. We met at the same hotel, the one we'd used before. It should have felt exciting, forbidden. But instead, it felt empty. When I walked into the room, he smiled, pulling me into his arms like nothing had changed. His touch was familiar, but it didn't ignite the spark it used to. I realized then, I wasn't here because I wanted him. I was here because I didn't want to be alone. We talked, but the words felt hollow, like echoes bouncing off walls that had already heard it all before. He asked about Ethan, about the fallout. I lied, downplaying the damage, pretending I had it under control. But I didn't. When I left the hotel that night, I felt more lost than ever. Friday came faster than I expected. The hours crawled, but the day flew by, and before I knew it, the front door creaked open. Ethan was home. He didn't slam the door. Didn't yell. He just walked in, set his bag down, and stood there, staring at me like he was seeing a stranger. I stood too, frozen in place, my rehearsed apologies tangled in my throat. "Where are the kids?" he asked, his voice low, controlled. "At my mom's," I replied quickly. I'd planned for this. I didn't want them to hear what was coming. Ethan nodded, stepping further into the room. The distance between us felt like miles. "Talk," he said simply. And just like that, it was my turn to speak. "But where do you even start when you've destroyed everything?" I opened my mouth, and the truth spilled out, raw and ugly. "I didn't plan to hurt you," I whispered. "It just..." "Don't," he cut me off sharply. "Don't insult me with that, it just happened." "Crap. You planned it. You canceled my flight. You lied to me. You lied to our kids." His words were knives, each one cutting deeper than the last. "I was unhappy," I blurted, my voice rising with frustration. You were distant. We were distant. I needed." "Needed what?" Ethan snapped, his calm facade cracking for the first time. "Needed to screw someone else to feel alive? Needed to destroy our family to find yourself?" I flinched. I deserved that. But I wasn't ready to surrender completely. "You weren't here," I shot back. "You were always working, always focused on everything but me." I felt invisible. Ethan laughed bitterly. "So, your solution was to make me feel invisible?" Silence. I had no response. No defense. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, pacing the room like he was trying to physically walk away from the reality of us. Finally, he stopped, turning to face me. His eyes were red, but no tears fell. "I loved you," he whispered. "I would have done anything for you. But you never gave me the chance." Those words, simple, raw, hit harder than all his anger combined. Because they were true. I broke down then, collapsing onto the floor, sobbing in a way I hadn't since I was a child. But Ethan didn't come to me. He didn't hold me. He just stood there, watching as the mess I'd created swallowed me whole. When I finally looked up, he was gone. Again. But this time, it felt permanent. After Ethan walked out that night, the silence wasn't just suffocating, it was deafening. It wasn't the absence of sound that crushed me, it was the absence of him. His presence had been like gravity, anchoring me even when I didn't realize it. Now, without him, everything felt weightless, hollow, drifting in a space I had created with my own lies. I sat on the floor for hours, staring at the door as if he might walk back through it. But he didn't. The only thing that filled the void was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall, a cruel reminder of every second I'd wasted, every moment I'd thrown away. When I finally dragged myself to my feet, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror. I barely recognized the woman staring back. Her eyes were swollen from crying, makeup smudged like war paint after a battle lost. But it wasn't just the physical mess. It was the emptiness behind her eyes. I'd spent so long convincing myself that Ethan was the problem, that our marriage had lost its spark because of him, that his absence, his long work hours, his distractions were to blame. But standing there, face to face with my own reflection, the truth was inescapable. It wasn't him. It was me. I had been searching for something: validation, excitement, control. I thought I'd found it in someone else's arms, in stolen moments that felt thrilling because they were forbidden. But now, stripped of the lies, I realized all I had found was emptiness disguised as passion. The days that followed were a blur. I went through the motions like a robot, getting the kids ready, packing lunches, pretending everything was fine. But they knew. Kids always know. "Is Daddy coming home today?" my son asked one evening, his voice small, hopeful. I forced a smile. "Not today, sweetheart." He nodded, looking down at his plate, his appetite fading along with the light in his eyes. It shattered me in ways Ethan's words never could. I wanted to hate Ethan for leaving, for walking away without giving me another chance. But how could I? He had every right. I'd burned the bridge between us, and he'd simply chosen not to walk across the ashes. Loneliness has a way of making you desperate. One night, after the kids were asleep and the house felt like it was closing in on me, I picked up my phone. My fingers hovered over Ethan's contact, but I didn't press call. Instead, I messaged him. "I need to see you." The reply was quick. "Of course." "My place?" I knew I shouldn't go. It wouldn't fix anything. But I needed to feel wanted, needed to feel something other than regret. So, I went. But the moment I walked through his door, I knew it was a mistake. The charm that once felt intoxicating now felt rehearsed. His smile, his touch, it all felt hollow. I wasn't there because I missed him. I was there because I didn't know how to sit alone with my guilt. Afterward, as I dressed, he didn't even try to stop me. No lingering kisses, no promises. Just a casual, "See you around." And that was the moment I realized he was never going to fill the void Ethan left. No one could. When I got home, the kids were asleep, and there was an envelope on the kitchen counter. My name, written in Ethan's handwriting. My heart raced as I opened it, my hands trembling. Inside was a simple letter. No anger, no accusations. Just, "Ethan. Claire. I thought I'd be able to say everything I needed to your face, but I can't. I don't even know who I'm talking to anymore. The woman I married isn't the woman standing in front of me now. I keep trying to figure out when it all changed. Was it something I did? Something I didn't do? I've replayed every moment, every argument, every silence. But the truth is, none of it matters. You made your choice. And now I'm making mine. I'm filing for divorce. I'll be staying at my brother's until we can figure out the arrangements for the kids. They deserve better than this, better than lies and broken promises. I loved you, Claire. I really did. But love isn't enough when it's one-sided. Ethan. The paper slipped from my fingers, floating to the floor like the final piece of my life falling apart. I thought I'd feel rage, maybe heartbreak. But all I felt was nothing. A hollow echo where my heart used to be. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat there, staring at nothing, surrounded by the ruins of my own making. The next morning, I looked at my kids and realized they were the only pieces of my life worth fighting for. I'd already lost Ethan. But maybe, just maybe, I could hold on to them. But even that hope was fleeting. Because when you shatter something, you can't always put the pieces back together. And sometimes, the damage is too deep to fix. The letter sat on the kitchen floor, its words burned into my mind like a scar I couldn't cover. I had read it so many times that I could recite every word, yet each time it hit me differently, sharper, deeper, until there was nothing left inside me but regret wrapped in denial. I thought the worst part of betrayal was getting caught. I was wrong. The worst part was realizing that no matter how much you wanted to rewind time, to fix what you broke, some things stay broken. The days after Ethan's letter felt surreal, like I was moving through a life that didn't belong to me. I went through the motions, waking the kids up, making breakfast, packing lunches, all the things Ethan used to help with. His absence echoed in every empty chair, every untouched coffee mug, every quiet morning without his sarcastic jokes or soft kisses on my cheek. The kids asked about him constantly. "Is Daddy still at Uncle Adam's?" my daughter asked one evening, her small voice filled with confusion I couldn't soothe. I nodded, forcing a smile. "He's just busy right now, sweetheart." She frowned, not convinced. Kids aren't stupid. They feel things, even when you try to protect them from the truth. After they were asleep, I'd sit alone in the dark, staring at my phone, wondering if I should call Ethan, beg him to come home. But what would I say? "I'm sorry. I miss you. I didn't mean to ruin everything." None of it felt enough. Because none of it could undo what I'd done. A few days later, an envelope arrived in the mail. Thick. Heavy. Divorce papers. Seeing my name next to respondent was like a punch to the chest. The legal language was cold, clinical, asset division, custody arrangements, terms of separation. But beneath the formality, it was a death certificate for our marriage. I stared at the signature line for hours, pen in hand, unable to move. Signing it felt like admitting defeat, like accepting that Ethan was really gone. I didn't sign it. Not yet. Because even if there was nothing left to save, I wasn't ready to let go. I made the mistake of reaching out to him again. Not because I wanted to, but because I didn't know who else to turn to. "I'm falling apart," I texted. His reply came fast. "Come over." So, I did. But it wasn't the same. The thrill was gone. There was no spark, no excitement, just two people using each other to fill the emptiness. Afterward, I sat on the edge of his bed, staring at the floor. "What are we doing?" I whispered. He shrugged, lighting a cigarette like I hadn't just shattered my life for something that meant nothing. That's when it hit me, I wasn't special to him. I never was. I left without saying goodbye, driving home with tears blurring my vision, realizing that I'd traded a man who loved me for someone who never really cared. The next day, Ethan showed up unexpectedly. I heard the knock, and my heart jumped to my throat. When I opened the door, there he was, standing on the porch like a ghost from a life I'd lost. He didn't look angry. Just tired. "Can we talk?" he asked. I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. We sat in the living room, the space between us filled with everything we weren't saying. "I want full custody," Ethan said finally, his voice low but firm. My heart stopped. "What? No. You can't." "I can," he interrupted. "And I will." Panic surged through me. I shook my head, tears welling up. "Ethan, you can't do this. They're my kids too." He looked at me then, really looked at me, with eyes full of disappointment and something colder, resolve. "They deserve better than this. Better than a mother who puts herself before her family." His words sliced through me like glass. "I made mistakes," I whispered, my voice breaking. "But I love them. You can't take them from me." Ethan's jaw clenched. "You should have thought about that before." And with that, he stood up, walking out of the house, leaving me shattered all over again. After he left, I lost it. I tore the divorce papers in half, then into quarters, as if destroying them could change the reality they held. I screamed into the emptiness of the house, sobbing until my body ached from the weight of it all. I wanted to blame Ethan, to be angry at him for giving up so easily. But the truth was, he didn't give up. I did. I gave up on us the moment I let someone else into my heart, even if it was just for the thrill, the validation. I thought I could control the damage, that I could keep my secrets separate from my real life. But secrets don't stay hidden. They rot from the inside out until there's nothing left but ruins. And I was standing in the middle of mine. I knew I had to fight. Not for Ethan, I'd already lost him. But for my kids. Because if I didn't, I'd lose them too. And then there'd be nothing left of the life I once had. Nothing but echoes of what I'd destroyed. After Ethan left that day, his words echoed through my mind like a siren I couldn't silence. I want full custody. I never thought he'd go that far. I thought no matter how bad things got between us, the kids would be the one thing we'd always agree on. But now, even that was slipping through my fingers. I'd already lost my husband. I couldn't lose them too. The next few days passed in a haze. I couldn't focus on anything, not work, not the kids, not even pretending to be okay. Every time I looked at them, my heart clenched. I watched them laugh, play, go about their routines, completely unaware that their lives were hanging in the balance. How do you explain to a child that their family is unraveling because of decisions you made? How do you look into their innocent eyes and know that your selfishness might cost you everything? I didn't have answers. But I knew one thing: I had to fight. I wasn't going to let Ethan paint me as some villain and take them away from me. No matter what mistakes I'd made, I was still their mother. I met with a lawyer the following week, sitting across from her in a cold, sterile office that smelled faintly of old coffee and legal paperwork. She listened quietly as I explained everything, well, almost everything. I left out the affair. At least for now. When I finished, she tapped her pen against her notepad thoughtfully. Custody cases are complicated, she said finally. Judges don't usually grant full custody unless there's clear evidence of neglect, abuse, or unfit parenting. Relief washed over me until she added. But if your husband's prepared, with documentation, witnesses, things could get difficult. My heart sank. Ethan wasn't impulsive. He was methodical. He didn't threaten things unless he was serious. What should I do? I whispered. She gave me a tight smile. Be prepared. And be honest. Judges can see through rehearsed stories. They want the truth. But what if the truth is exactly what could destroy me? A few days later, I received the official court summons. It was surreal seeing my name on legal documents, written in black and white: Petitioner, Ethan Carter. Respondent, Claire Carter. It felt like a slap in the face. Ethan wasn't just serious. He was ready to go to war. I sat on the couch for hours after the kids went to bed, staring at the papers, my chest tightening with every word. Custody hearings. Parental evaluations. Character witnesses. I thought about texting him, begging him to stop, to talk to me face to face like we used to. But what was the point? He wasn't the same man anymore. And I wasn't the same woman. 2 days before the first hearing, Ethan showed up at the house. No warning. Just there. When I opened the door, my heart jumped into my throat. He looked tired, his face shadowed with something deeper than anger. Can we talk? He asked. I stepped aside silently, letting him in. We sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the same table where we used to eat dinner as a family, plan vacations, laugh over silly things. Now it felt like neutral ground in enemy territory. I didn't come to fight, Ethan said quietly. I didn't respond. I was afraid if I spoke, everything would come spilling out: anger, regret, desperation. I'm not doing this to hurt you, he continued. I don't trust you anymore. Not with them. Not after everything. His words were like knives, sharp and deliberate. I'm still their mother, I whispered, my voice trembling. You can't take that away from me. He leaned back in his chair, his jaw clenched. I know. And I don't want to. But I don't know how to co-parent with someone I can't even look at without remembering. He cut himself off, shaking his head. Silence settled between us like a heavy blanket. Then he said something I didn't expect. I'll drop the full custody request if you agree to a strict custody arrangement. Split time. Legal agreements. No flexibility. It wasn't what I wanted. But it was better than losing them completely. I nodded slowly. Okay. But inside, I was crumbling. The agreement wasn't finalized yet, but the terms were clear. Ethan would have the kids for half the week. No last-minute changes, no spontaneous visits. Just cold, scheduled time slots. The first night without them was unbearable. I wandered through the empty house, haunted by the absence of their laughter, their little voices calling out for me. I stared at their empty beds, their toys left mid-play, like echoes of a life I'd shattered. I thought the worst part of cheating would be losing Ethan. But it wasn't. The worst part was losing the life I'd taken for granted. The family I'd broken. The home I'd destroyed. Late that night, my phone buzzed. A message from him. Thinking about you. I stared at it for a long time, my finger hovering over the screen. Then I deleted it. Because for the first time since this all began, I realized. He wasn't what I needed. And he never was. The house felt smaller without the kids. The silence was unbearable, filling every corner like an unwelcome guest. I thought I'd enjoy the freedom, quiet nights, no interruptions, but the emptiness was suffocating. Every room reminded me of what I'd lost, not just Ethan but the life I'd built around him, around us. The worst part? I'd done this to myself. I thought about him that night, the man I'd risked everything for. The excitement I once felt when his name flashed on my screen was gone, replaced by a gnawing sense of regret. His text sat unopened, the words thinking about you lingering like an echo I couldn't escape. But I didn't reply. Not because I was strong, but because I finally realized how weak I'd been. Our new custody schedule began the following week. Ethan picked the kids up from school, and I wasn't there to greet them when they came home. That reality hit harder than I expected. When he pulled into the driveway to drop them off later that weekend, I watched from the window, my heart racing. He didn't even get out of the car. Just a quick wave, the kids jumping out with their backpacks, and then he drove off. No words. No eye contact. It was like I was invisible. The kids seemed fine on the surface, but I could see the confusion in their eyes, the questions they didn't know how to ask. I wanted to explain, to make it better, but how do you tell your children that you're the reason their family isn't whole anymore? You don't. So, I didn't. I tried to distract myself. I went back to work full-time, filled my calendar with meaningless tasks, brunch with friends, yoga classes, even a book club I had no interest in. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the loneliness crept in like a shadow, always there, just waiting. One evening, after a particularly hard day, I found myself scrolling through old photos on my phone. Pictures of Ethan, the kids, vacations, birthdays, moments frozen in time when we were still a family. I stopped at one photo of Ethan holding our daughter on his shoulders, both of them laughing, their faces lit up with pure, unfiltered joy. I broke down. I cried until my chest ached, until there were no tears left, just the hollow emptiness of regret. I thought about calling him, about apologizing again, but what was the point? He didn't want my apologies. He wanted the woman he married. And I wasn't her anymore. A few days later, I ran into Ethan at the grocery store. It was the first time we'd been face to face since that night in the kitchen when he told me he wanted full custody. He was standing in the produce aisle, looking at apples, his expression focused but relaxed. He looked good, healthier, lighter, like the weight of our broken marriage had been lifted from his shoulders. I froze, unsure whether to approach him or turn around and pretend I hadn't seen him. But before I could decide, he looked up and our eyes met. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then he gave me a polite nod, a simple acknowledgement, and turned back to his shopping like I was just another stranger passing by. It shouldn't have hurt as much as it did. But it did. I walked past him without a word, my heart pounding in my chest. That night, the silence was unbearable. The house felt like a museum of mistakes, every picture frame, every piece of furniture a relic from a life I'd destroyed. I poured myself a glass of wine. Then another. And another. By the third glass, I was staring at my phone again, tempted to reach out to him. To feel wanted, even if it was temporary. I almost did. But instead, I opened my messages and found Ethan's contact. My fingers hovered over the screen, my heart racing. And for reasons I still can't explain, I sent him a message. I miss you. I stared at the screen, my heart pounding, regretting it the moment I hit send. Minutes passed. No reply. Hours passed. Still nothing. I fell asleep with my phone clutched in my hand, hoping for a response that never came. The next day, Ethan showed up unexpectedly. When I opened the door, he didn't say hello. He didn't ask how I was. He just looked at me with that same cold, empty expression. "Don't text me again," he said flatly. "We're done." His words hit harder than any fight we'd ever had. I wanted to scream, to beg, to explain. But what was there to say? So, I just nodded. And he walked away, again. But this time, I knew he wasn't coming back after he left. I sat on the floor, staring at the door, feeling the weight of every bad choice I'd ever made. I realized something that night. It wasn't just Ethan I'd lost. It was myself. The woman I used to be was gone, buried under layers of lies, mistakes, and regret. And the worst part? I didn't know if I'd ever find her again, after Ethan's words, "Don't text me again. We're done." The house felt heavier than ever, as if the walls themselves were closing in, suffocating me with memories I couldn't escape. I thought I had hit rock bottom before, but I was wrong. This was rock bottom. Because this time, there was no illusion of hope. No lingering thread to hold on to. Ethan was gone. And he wasn't coming back. I stopped counting the days after that. They blurred together, an endless loop of waking up in an empty bed, pouring coffee I didn't drink, and pretending to function. The kids were the only anchor keeping me from floating into complete oblivion. But even they could feel the shift. I saw it in the way my daughter hesitated before asking questions, the way my son's laughter grew less frequent. They didn't know the details, but they knew something was broken, something that couldn't be fixed with a kiss on the forehead or a bedtime story. One evening, while helping with homework, my daughter looked up at me with her big, questioning eyes. "Mom, are you sad because of Daddy?" Her words were simple, but they hit harder than any argument with Ethan ever did. I forced a smile, the kind that didn't reach my eyes. "I'm okay, sweetheart." But I wasn't. Not even close. After the kids went to bed, I found myself standing in front of the bathroom mirror, staring at my reflection. I didn't recognize the woman looking back. Her eyes were dull, hollow. Her face, once vibrant and full of life, now looked tired, worn, aged beyond her years. I traced the faint lines around my eyes, the shadows beneath them, and wondered when I had become this person. When had I stopped being the woman Ethan fell in love with? The answer was simple. The moment I stopped loving myself. That night, I picked up my phone again. Ethan's contact was still saved, even though I knew he wouldn't respond. I started typing a message. "I'm sorry. Not just for the affair, but for everything. For taking you for granted, for not seeing how lucky I was, for thinking you'd always be there no matter what. I understand now. And I'm sorry." I stared at the words, my thumb hovering over the send button. But I didn't send it. Because it wasn't for him. It was for me. I deleted the message, turned off my phone, and sat in the darkness, feeling the weight of every choice I'd made. Days later, my phone rang. It was Ethan. My heart raced as I answered, my voice shaky. "Hello?" His voice was calm, distant. "I need to talk to you about the kids." Of course. It was never going to be about us again. Only them. We discussed logistics, school events, drop-offs, holidays. His tone was businesslike, void of any emotion. When the call ended, I stared at my phone, realizing that was probably the closest I'd ever get to hearing his voice again outside of co-parenting. And it hurt more than I expected. Eventually, I realized I had two choices: drown in my mistakes or try to rebuild. So, I started small. I cleaned the house, not out of habit, but to clear the physical reminders of the past. I packed away old photos, not to forget, but to stop reliving what I'd lost. I focused on the kids, not as a distraction, but as a purpose. They were the one part of my life I hadn't completely destroyed. And, slowly, I began to face myself. Not the version I pretended to be, but the real me, the flawed, broken, messy woman who had made unforgivable mistakes. I started therapy, something I'd always dismissed before. I thought it was for people who couldn't handle their own lives. Turns out, I was exactly that person. And that's where I learned the hardest lesson of all. You can't outrun yourself. Months passed. The legal process dragged on, but the sharp edges of heartbreak began to dull. One day, Ethan showed up early to drop off the kids. I wasn't expecting him. We stood in the doorway, awkwardly at first, the kids running inside, oblivious to the tension between us. For a moment, it was just us again. I cleared my throat. "Do you want to come in? Just for a minute?" To my surprise, he nodded. We sat in the living room, the silence thick but not as suffocating as before. "I never wanted to hate you," he said finally, his voice soft. "I just didn't know how to love you after everything." I nodded, tears welling up. "I understand." And I did. More than ever. There were no grand apologies, no dramatic confessions. Just two people sitting in the aftermath of a life they'd built and broken together. When he left, I didn't cry. Because I knew it was really over. But for the first time, I also knew I'd survive Ethan and I would never be what we were. But we could be something else, the co-parents, maybe even friends one day. And as for me? I was learning to live with my mistakes, not as scars, but as lessons. Because sometimes the hardest person to forgive isn't the one you hurt. It's yourself. Time has a cruel way of healing and haunting at the same time. As the months passed, life settled into a new, unfamiliar rhythm, a routine carved from the jagged edges of what used to be my family. The echoes of laughter that once filled the house had faded, replaced by the quiet hum of solitude. I thought I'd feel emptier than this. But emptiness isn't loud. It's subtle, creeping into the spaces between breaths, lingering in the pauses between one moment and the next. And I had a lot of pauses now. The day of the final custody hearing arrived like an inevitable storm. I sat in the sterile courtroom, the walls cold and indifferent, much like the faces around me. Ethan was there, just a few feet away, but he felt miles apart. He didn't look at me. Not once. His lawyer spoke with the calm confidence of someone holding all the cards. My lawyer did her best, but facts don't bend for emotions. When the judge gave his ruling, shared custody with strict conditions, I felt a strange mix of relief and devastation. I hadn't lost them completely, but the life I once knew was gone, replaced by schedules, legal documents, and the harsh reality of co-parenting. As we left the courtroom, I wanted to say something to Ethan. Anything. But what was left to say? So, I let him walk away. Again, the following weeks felt surreal. I decorated the kids' rooms, trying to make the house feel less like a museum of memories. I filled their days with activities, not to distract them, but maybe to distract myself. Ethan and I exchanged polite texts about the kids, their school projects, their doctor appointments. Nothing more. The man who once knew every part of me was now just another name in my contacts. And that was my fault. Months later, I saw him again. Not Ethan, the man I'd risked everything for. The man who, for a fleeting moment, made me feel alive in all the wrong ways. He was sitting at a cafe, laughing with someone new. I watched from across the street, invisible, forgotten. And that's when it hit me. He had moved on. Without guilt. Without consequences. while I was left with the ruins. But strangely, I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel heartbreak. I felt nothing. Because he never mattered. Not really. He was just a symptom of something broken inside me, not the cause. One evening, long after the kids were asleep, I found myself scrolling through old photos again, family vacations, birthday parties, lazy Sundays in the park. I stopped at a picture of Ethan holding our daughter, his smile genuine, his eyes filled with a warmth I hadn't seen in years. Tears blurred my vision, not from regret over losing him, but for losing the version of myself who didn't know how fragile happiness could be. I picked up my phone, tempted to send one last message. Something simple. Thank you. But I didn't. Because closure doesn't always come with words. Sometimes, it's just the absence of them. Time didn't heal everything, but it softened the edges. Ethan eventually remarried. I met her once, a kind, soft-spoken woman who made my kids laugh in a way that both hurt and comforted me. She wasn't the villain I feared. I was my own villain. And maybe that's why I finally found peace. Not because life got easier, but because I stopped expecting it to. People always say life is about second chances. But sometimes, you don't get one. Sometimes, the best you can do is live with the choices you made, the hearts you broke, including your own. I'll never be the woman Ethan fell in love with. But I'm learning to be someone else. Someone who understands that love isn't a feeling you chase. It's a choice you protect. And I failed. But I'm still here. Still trying. And maybe that's enough.